It was only a portrait of a plantation owner and her enslaved woman until specialists noticed a hidden and forbidden truth. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at the receiving dock of the National Archives in Washington, D.C., signing for a parcel that had arrived without a return address. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2024, unusually cold for the season, and she had served as curator of the Civil War photographic collection for 12 years. During that time, she had received hundreds of donations, daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and carte de visite photographs, each offering a glimpse into one of the most violent and divided periods in American history. Yet something about this delivery immediately drew her attention. The box was small and neatly wrapped in brown paper, with only her name and the archive's address written in careful block letters. There was no phone number, no email, nothing else. Inside was a short typed note. "Dr. Mitchell, this photograph has been in my possession for 30 years. I acquired it from an estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina. I believe it may be historically important, but I do not wish to be identified. Please study it closely. Some things are not what they seem. The truth matters more than my name." Sarah felt a familiar sense of curiosity spark inside her. Anonymous donations were uncommon, but they did happen. Often, people inherited objects tied to painful or troubling histories and wanted them preserved properly without attaching their identity to them. She gently removed the photograph from its protective wrapping. It was a carte de visite, a small mounted photograph popular during the Civil War period, about the size of a modern business card, and surprisingly well preserved for its age. The image showed two people posed in a formal studio with a painted backdrop of classical columns and flowing drapery. On the left stood a white woman, likely between 28 and 30 years old, dressed in an elaborate silk gown with a wide hoop skirt, fitted bodice, and fine lace collar typical of wealthy Southern women in the early 1860s. Her hair was styled in the fashion of the time, parted in the center and pulled smoothly back. She stood confidently, one hand resting on an ornate side table, her face calm and controlled. Everything about her appearance suggested wealth, power, and comfort with authority. On the right stood a black woman, clearly younger, perhaps 22 to 24 years old, wearing a simple but carefully made dark dress with a plain white collar. Her hair was covered with a white head wrap, commonly worn by enslaved domestic workers. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her posture was straight, yet her shoulders curved slightly inward. Her expression was neutral, her eyes lowered just enough to reflect the expected submissiveness demanded of enslaved people when photographed beside their enslavers. The arrangement was typical of Civil War-era photographs, meant to promote the idea of a kind and orderly relationship between enslavers and the enslaved. These images were propaganda, designed to defend slavery by presenting it as a system in which enslaved people were supposedly content and cared for. Sarah had examined many photographs like this over the years, and they always left her unsettled. They showed oppression carefully staged to look like harmony. She turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink was a simple note: Caroline Ashford and her girl Rachel, Charleston, South Carolina, March 1863. That was all. Rachel had no last name. There was no description of her role beyond the possessive phrase "her girl." This was common for the era. Enslaved people were rarely given full names or individual identities in official records. Sarah placed the photograph on her examination table beneath archival lighting and picked up her professional loupe. The anonymous note echoed in her mind. Some things are not what they appear. What had the donor noticed? What detail had prompted such a warning? She began her routine examination, checking for damage, alterations, or anything out of the ordinary. The photograph appeared genuine. The paper, mounting, and printing technique all matched an 1863 origin. There were no clear signs of tampering, but as Sarah studied the faces more closely through her magnifier, a quiet unease began to grow. There was something she could not yet name, something that made her lean in closer, her heart beating faster with the feeling that an important discovery was just out of reach. She reached for her phone and called her colleague, Dr. James Warren, an expert in forensic analysis of historical photographs. "James, can you come to my office? I need another set of eyes on something. Give me 10 minutes. He replied. Sarah turned her attention back to the photograph, to the two women divided by the brutal social order of 1863 Charleston. Caroline Ashford, plantation mistress. Rachel, a woman whose last name was deemed unimportant enough to ignore. Yet the longer Sarah looked at them, the more unsettled she felt. She picked up her digital scanner, knowing she needed a much higher resolution view than her loupe could provide. Whatever the anonymous donor had noticed, she was determined to uncover it. Dr. James Warren arrived carrying his portable digital microscope and laptop, equipment that had helped them analyze and authenticate many historical images before. He was in his mid-40s, calm and precise, with the patience of someone who knew that history often revealed its truth slowly. "What are we looking at?" he asked as he set up. Sarah handed him the photograph along with the anonymous note, an 1863 carte de visite from Charleston, plantation mistress and her enslaved domestic worker. A standard propaganda image for the period, but the donor insisted that it needed careful examination. James studied the photograph through Sarah's loupe, his expression professional and unreadable. Then he looked up. "Have you noticed the facial structure?" Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. "I was starting to," she said, "but I wanted your opinion first." James connected his digital microscope to his laptop and positioned the photograph under the lens. The image appeared on the screen as he increased the magnification, first studying the overall composition, then moving to specific features. "Let's start with basic facial mapping," he said, opening specialized forensic software. He marked key points on Caroline Ashford's face, the distance between her eyes, the width of her nose, the angle of her cheekbones, the shape of her jaw, the placement of her ears. Then he did the same for Rachel. As the software generated overlay comparisons, the similarities became impossible to ignore. "The distance between the eyes is nearly the same," James said quietly. "The ratio of face width to length matches closely. The cheekbones, the jaw angle, even the ear placement. These are genetically influenced traits." He displayed both faces side by side with the measurement markers visible. "Sarah, this level of similarity is far beyond coincidence." Sarah leaned closer, her thoughts racing. "You're saying they're related?" "Almost certainly," James replied. "Sisters, most likely. Possibly mother and daughter, but the age gap seems too small." A cold feeling moved through Sarah. She knew the history well enough to understand what this implied. In the antebellum South, white plantation owners frequently raped enslaved women. Children born from that violence were enslaved themselves, even if they were half-siblings to the enslavers' white children. "If they were sisters," Sarah said slowly, "then Caroline's father raped an enslaved woman and enslaved his own child," James finished. "It was tragically common. But having photographic evidence this clear is rare." Sarah walked to the window, staring down at the traffic below as she tried to process it. "The donor knew," she said. "That's why they wrote that note. This photo isn't just propaganda. It may show a woman enslaving her own half-sister. We need more proof before we say that publicly," James cautioned. "Facial analysis is strong but not final. We'll need records, birth documents, plantation logs, family histories. If we can trace descendants, DNA would confirm it." Sarah nodded and turned back to the image. The donor mentioned an estate sale in Charleston in 1994. If this came from the Ashford family estate, there could be letters, plantation papers, maybe a family Bible. We need everything we can find on Caroline Ashford. James was already typing. "I'll start with Charleston archives. Wealthy families left paper trails." "And Rachel?" Sarah asked. James sighed. "That will be harder. Enslaved people rarely appear in records by name. But if she lived past emancipation, there might be census data, Freedmen's Bureau records, or church documents." Sarah carefully photographed the carte de visite from every angle, then captured the writing on the back. "Caroline Ashford and her girl Rachel," she read aloud. "The language is so casual." "That was intentional," James said. "It reinforced ownership." As Sarah searched databases, the Ashford name quickly surfaced, a powerful Charleston family dating back to the early 1700s. "I've got something," Sarah said. Robert Ashford, born 1798, died 1865, owner of Ashford Grove Plantation, about 3,000 acres and over 200 enslaved people. One legitimate daughter, Caroline, born in 1834. She would have been 28 or 29 in 1863, James said. "That fits. No legitimate siblings listed," Sarah added. "She was officially an only child. They both paused. Officially. For days they worked relentlessly, gathering records from state archives, libraries, and university collections. The Ashford family history unfolded in detail. Robert Ashford was wealthy, politically influential, and a strong supporter of slavery. Caroline had attended a prestigious finishing school and married Thomas Pean, who died fighting for the Confederacy in 1862. After his death, she returned to her father's plantation. "Look at this," James said, pulling up a plantation inventory from 1850, a list of enslaved people for tax purposes. "Here's a woman named Sarah, age 23, listed as a house servant." Sarah did the math quickly. She would have been about 37 in 1863, old enough to be Rachel's mother. James nodded. "See if she had children listed." Sarah scrolled further down. Beneath Sarah's name was a note. "One child, female, age 3, named Rachel." "There," Sarah whispered. "Rachel, age 3 in 1850. That would make her around 16 or 17 years old in 1863. Sarah looked at James. "That's younger than she looks in the photograph." Ages of enslaved people in these records were often estimates, James explained. Enslavers rarely kept exact birth records, and harsh living conditions, poor nutrition, and constant labor often made enslaved people look older than they really were. They kept searching through plantation documents, slowly building a timeline of Rachel's life from the limited records that existed. She appeared again in tax inventories from 1855 and 1860, always listed as Sarah's daughter and always assigned to work inside the house rather than in the fields. Then they found something that made Sarah's stomach tighten. It was a plantation ledger from 1855 that recorded the distribution of clothing to enslaved workers. Most entries were routine and repetitive. Men were given 2 shirts and 1 pair of trousers each year. Women received 2 dresses and 1 head covering. But beside Rachel's name there was a handwritten note in the margin. "Give extra fabric this year. Master's orders. Girl looks like family. Keep her in house away from visitors." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. They had known. Robert Ashford knew Rachel looked like his own family, and he had given direct orders to keep her out of sight so visitors would not notice the resemblance. James immediately photographed the document. "This is clear written proof that Rachel's appearance was unusual enough to worry him," he said. "When we combine this with the facial analysis, it strongly points to her being Robert Ashford's biological daughter." Sarah felt a deep anger settle in her chest. It wasn't loud or sudden, but cold and steady, the kind that came from uncovering injustice piece by piece. Robert Ashford had raped an enslaved woman named Sarah. When their child Rachel was born, he enslaved his own daughter. As she grew older and began to resemble his white child Caroline, he deliberately hid her, knowing her face exposed his crime. "We need to know what happened to Sarah," Sarah said quietly. "Rachel's mother. Is she mentioned in later records?" James opened the 1860 tax inventory and scanned the list. He stopped suddenly. "Here, Sarah, age 33, house servant. But look at this note added later, in different ink." The word was simple and brutal. "Deceased, September 1860. No cause of death, no explanation." Sarah was 33 years old when she died, and the records did not even bother to say how. She simply disappeared from the plantation's accounts. "So Rachel lost her mother in 1860, Sarah said softly. "She would have been about 13. After that, she was alone in that house, enslaved by her own father and half-sister." They continued their work, finding small traces of Rachel scattered through broken records. She appeared in Caroline's personal diary. James had found a transcribed version in a university archive. Rachel was never mentioned by name alone, only as the girl Rachel, or my maid. Caroline referred to her casually, the way someone might talk about a useful household item. One diary entry from January 1863 made Sarah feel sick. "Father insists I have my portrait made with Rachel before he passes. He says it will show that our family treats our people with Christian kindness. I suppose he is right, though I find the whole thing tiresome. Rachel will need a proper dress for the photograph. I shall have my old blue silk altered to fit her." The photograph was his idea, James said quietly. Robert Ashford was dying. He passed away in March 1865. He wanted a permanent image that showed his enslavement of his own daughter as kindness. Sarah stared at the diary words. Caroline had written about posing with her half-sister in a propaganda photograph with boredom, as if it were no more important than any dull social duty. There was no sign she understood or cared about the cruelty of it. "We need to find descendants," Sarah said. Caroline's white descendants, and Rachel's descendants if she had children. DNA testing could prove they were sisters. And if we can prove it, James added, this photograph becomes something extraordinary. Clear evidence of one of slavery's most hidden crimes, enslaving one's own children. While James searched for family records, Sarah returned to the photograph itself. The donor's note echoed in her mind. "Please examine it carefully. Some things are not what they appear." They had already uncovered the facial resemblance, the plantation records, and Caroline's diary entry. Yet Sarah felt there was still something more hidden in the image. She set up her professional scanner, a high-end flatbed capable of capturing detail far beyond what the eye could see, and carefully placed the carte de visite inside. The scan took almost 30 minutes at the highest resolution, creating a file so large it required special software to open. When it finished, Sarah displayed it on her large monitor and began slowly examining every part of the image at extreme magnification. She started with the background, the painted studio scene, the floor, the ornate table where Caroline rested her hand. Nothing unusual. She moved to the clothing, studying fabric textures, buttons, and the lace on Caroline's collar. She examined Caroline's jewelry, a small brooch at her neck and a simple ring on her hand. Then she shifted to Rachel, the plain, dark dress, the white collar, the head wrap. Rachel's hands were folded at her waist, fingers interlocked in a formal pose, but as Sarah zoomed in further, something stopped her. Rachel's hands were not just folded, they were positioned carefully, deliberately. She was holding something between her palms. It was small and mostly hidden by her fingers, but just visible if you knew where to look. Sarah's heart began to pound. She adjusted the contrast and brightness, pulling details out of shadows that had hidden them for 161 years. It was paper. A small folded piece of paper, no more than 2 inches across, pressed between Rachel's hands and intentionally concealed. "James," Sarah called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." James stepped closer as she showed him the screen. At normal size, Rachel's hands looked empty, but at full magnification, the hidden paper was unmistakable. "She was holding something during the photograph," James said softly, "something she didn't want the photographer or Caroline to notice." "Something small enough to hide," Sarah said. "The question is, what was written on it? And does it still exist?" James pulled up the donor's note on his phone. "Please examine it carefully. Some things are not what they appear." He looked at Sarah. "The donor knew about this paper. That's what they wanted you to find." "Which means," Sarah said slowly, "they may have the paper itself." She stared at the tiny corner of folded paper, hidden in Rachel's hands more than a century ago. What had been so important that Rachel risked hiding it during a photograph that would be kept by the very family that enslaved her? "We need to find the donor," Sarah said. The package had been mailed from Charleston, South Carolina, but there was no return address. Sarah contacted the Postal Service, but without a criminal case, they could not release sender info. So she tried another way. The note mentioned an estate sale in Charleston 30 years earlier, in 1994. Sarah contacted colleagues at the Charleston Historical Society and searched records of estate auctions from that time connected to the Ashford or Peton families. After 3 days of calls and database searches, she found something promising. In June 1994, the estate of Margaret Petton Thornton had been auctioned in Charleston. Margaret was 98 years old when she died, the last living direct descendant of Caroline Ashford Peton. Sarah obtained the auction catalogue. It listed furniture, silver, paintings, books, and one entry that stood out: miscellaneous historical documents and photographs, various dates, approximately 150 items sold as one lot. "That's it," James said. The photograph was part of that lot. Someone bought it in 1994 and kept it for 30 years. "But why wait so long?" Sarah asked. She posted careful messages on genealogy forums and historical society boards, asking about items purchased from the Thornton estate sale, without revealing her discoveries. A week passed with no replies. Then, on a Monday morning, Sarah received an email from an address made up of random letters and numbers, clearly a temporary account. Dr. Mitchell, I am the person who sent you the photograph. I have followed your research for several years and believed you would investigate this properly. I purchased a box of Ashford family papers and photographs at the 1994 estate sale. I was a graduate history student at the time. Among the items was the photograph you now have, along with other materials I believe you should see. I waited because Margaret Thornton's children and grandchildren were still alive and respected in Charleston society. I did not wish to cause harm to people who were not responsible for their ancestors' actions. The last of M died 6 months ago. It is time for the truth to be known. If you wish to see the remaining materials, I will meet you in Charleston. I prefer to remain anonymous, but I will give you everything I have. Sarah read the email 3 times. The donor had more documents, possibly even the answer to what Rachel had hidden in her hands. I have to go to Charleston, Sarah said. We both do, James replied. Sarah answered immediately, agreeing to meet. The reply came within an hour. Saturday, 2 p.m., Charleston Archives and History Center, 161 Meeting Street. Ask for a private room. I will drop off a box and leave. Please examine everything carefully. The truth about Rachel is more extraordinary than you realize. And yes, the paper she was holding is included. A chill ran through Sarah. The paper still existed. Whatever Rachel had risked hiding during that photograph, whatever truth she had tried to protect while being forced to pose as a loyal slave, Sarah was about to uncover it. Sarah and James flew to Charleston on Friday evening and checked into a hotel near the historic district. Neither of them slept well. The excitement and tension about what they might uncover the next day made sleep nearly impossible. On Saturday at 1:45 p.m., Sarah and James arrived at the Charleston Archives and History Center, a modern facility that held one of the most important collections of Lowcountry historical records in the South. Sarah had arranged for a private examination room, a climate-controlled space equipped for handling fragile historical materials. They sat together, making light conversation, both trying to hide their nervous energy. At exactly 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Sarah opened it to see a staff member holding a plain cardboard box. This was just dropped off at the front desk for Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman said. The person didn't leave. A name. They only said you were expecting it. Did you notice who brought it? Sarah asked. An older person, maybe in their 60s or 70s, the staff member replied. They were wearing a hat and sunglasses. I honestly couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They stayed less than a minute, set the box down, said it was for you, and left. Sarah thanked her and took the box. It felt heavier than she expected. She closed the door and placed it carefully on the table, her hands shaking slightly. Let's see what's inside, James said as he pulled on archival gloves. Sarah did the same and slowly opened the box. Inside were several items, each wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and labeled with handwritten index cards. The first item was a leather-bound diary, its cover cracked with age. The label read, Caroline Ashford Petton Personal Diary, 1862 to 1867. Complete. Entries marked with red tabs are significant. The second item was a bundle of letters tied neatly with string. The label read, Correspondence between Caroline Ashford Petton and her cousin Anne Middleton, 1863 to 1865. See letter dated April 1863. The third item was a small Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by time. The label read, Bible from Ashford Grove Plantation, Review Birth and Death Records. The final item was wrapped in several layers of tissue paper. Inside was a small folded piece of yellowed paper, brittle and fragile. The label simply said, This is what Rachel was holding. Read this first. Sarah and James looked at each other. With extreme care, Sarah unfolded the paper, supporting it on archival board so it would not tear. It had been folded tightly, small enough to hide between clasped hands. When opened fully, it was about 4 inches square, with torn edges that suggested it had been ripped from a larger sheet. Written in neat but fading handwriting were the words, I row. Bert Ashford, being of sound mind, do hereby acknowledge that Rachel, daughter of Sarah, is my natural daughter, born of my body, and is kin by blood to my legitimate daughter, Caroline. This I write in my own hand as truth. God forgive me for the evil I have done. April 7, 1863. Below was a signature, Robert Ashford. The room fell completely silent. It's a confession, James whispered, a signed confession. Sarah stared at the paper, struggling to absorb what it meant. He wrote this in April 1863, she said. Just weeks after the photograph was taken, he was already dying. This was a deathbed confession. But why write it at all, James asked. He kept her enslaved her entire life. Why confess now? Guilt, Sarah said softly. Or fear. He was facing death. Maybe he wanted the truth to exist somewhere, even if he never made it public. But how did Rachel get it? James asked. This would have been written in his private study. How did an enslaved young woman end up with it? That's what we need to understand, Sarah said, carefully photographing the paper. Let's look at the rest. She opened Caroline's diary to the first red-tabbed page. The entry was dated March 15, 1863. Father is dying. The doctor says his heart is failing, that he may have 6 months. He speaks often of sin and judgment. This morning he asked me to bring the girl Rachel to his study, which surprised me, as he has never shown interest in her before. They spoke alone for nearly an hour. When Rachel came out, her face looked changed. Not tears, but something deeper. Father would not explain, only said he had made peace with something that troubled him for years. The next marked entry was dated April 10, 1863. Something terrible and astonishing has occurred. Father confessed to me that Rachel is not merely a servant but my half-sister, that her mother Sarah was his. I can. O.T. write the word. He said he had written a document acknowledging this and had given it to Rachel himself, asking her forgiveness. I was horrified. I asked if he would free her or acknowledge her publicly. He said he lacked the courage. He only wished her to know the truth and have his written word as proof. He asked me to be kinder to her, as she is my sister. I do not know how to think or feel. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Caroline had known. Rachel had been given the confession directly by her father. Another marked entry followed, dated June 2, 1863. I am attempting to honor Father's request to treat Rachel with greater kindness, but it does not come easily. She is still a Negro, still a servant, regardless of whose child she may be. I asked her today if she still possessed Father's paper. She said she kept it hidden and safe. I demanded to know where, but she refused. I was angry, then remembered she is also my sister. Father died last month. That paper is all she has of him, the only acknowledgement of who she truly is. James exhaled slowly. So Rachel kept the confession hidden, and during the photograph she hid it in her hands. It was defiance, Sarah said. Quiet defiance. She couldn't speak the truth, but she could hold it. She hid proof of the lie inside a photograph meant to erase her humanity. They continued reading. Caroline never freed Rachel. She continued to call her a servant, even while admitting privately they were sisters. The diary showed constant contradiction, comfort winning over conscience every time. Then they reached an entry dated December 28, 1865. Rachel has gone. She left 3 days ago and has not returned. She waited until the war ended and freedom was certain. She took her belongings and Father's paper. I am not angry. I am relieved. Her presence reminded me of Father's sin and my own guilt. I wonder if I will ever see her again. She escaped, James said. She survived, and she took the confession, Sarah added. Her proof. Next, they examined the letters, especially the one from April 1863. Caroline had written to her cousin Anne, confessing the secret and admitting her fear of scandal outweighed her desire to do what was right. The final item was the family Bible. Sarah opened it to the records page. Births and deaths were listed carefully, going back generations. Then, squeezed into the margin in different ink, was an entry. Rachel, daughter of Robert Ashford and Sarah, born 1847, sister to Caroline. Below it, written firmly, this entry was made by me, Rachel Ashford, December 20th, 1865, before I leave this place forever. I write myself into this family record because I am family. I lived here as a slave for 18 years. These facts are true whether acknowledged or not. Now they are written. Sarah felt tears rise, Rachel had written herself into history. She made sure she wasn't erased, James said quietly. Over the next hours, they documented everything. Each piece revealed another layer: guilt without action, silence protected by privilege, and resistance preserved in writing. "We need to know what happened next," Sarah said. "Where did she go?" James searched records relentlessly. After days of work, they found her. In the 1870 census, Philadelphia, Rachel Ashford, seamstress, literate. She had kept her name, she had lived freely. She married a Union veteran, became a teacher, had children. She named them Robert, Sarah, and Caroline. Rachel Freeman died in 1912. Her death certificate listed her parents as Robert Ashford and Sarah. She never denied who she was. Months later, DNA confirmed the truth. Rachel and Caroline were half-sisters. The photograph became history's witness, Rachel holding the truth in her hands, refusing to disappear.